from that reading. We are going to be spending some time looking at the Judges this morning. My Bible is open to Judges chapter 4, and I invite you to take yours out and join me there and follow along as we consider some of what Roger also already mentioned, that we're going to be looking at some of the things that happens regularly. And we've been sort of following this pattern that we see beginning in Judges 1, and Judges 2 and 3 more closely details it and reveals to us the things that are going on there. And as we move through the book, we've come to Judges 4 and 5, and we're going to spend some time looking at the pictures of faith that we see in these chapters. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time in chapter 5. In fact, it's going to feel like we just kind of skipped over it. Chapter 4 and 5 go hand in hand. They go together very well. Chapter 4 is the telling, the account of the cycle of Deborah and Barak. And chapter 5 is the song of Deborah. It's the song that is sung after the victory has been given. As I said, we're not going to spend a lot of time in it, but I do want us to recognize that chapters 4 and 5 together create a very good picture for a Bible student to look at and recognize the different forms and styles of language that the Bible uses. And so while that's not going to be the focus of our study, I did want to make just a couple of very quick comments about that. There's two styles that is oftentimes employed. Thank you, Cody. Let's turn that on and try to continue. There's two styles in the Bible that are oftentimes employed. That is the idea of prose and poetry. Prose and poetry language. If you are familiar with any form of reading in your life today, if you like to pick up a book and read, if you like to read a newspaper article, you're familiar with prose writing. Prose is just simply straightforward form of writing. It's involved with getting information out. To tell the story, to tell people what you want them to know. Most of the Bible is written in this style. That I have a story to tell and I'm going to pass it on to you. The words that are used whenever we see prose style writing are very common words, and they're used in very expected ways. It is a style of writing that is logical and chronological, and tries to just get a message across, as opposed to poetry. Poetry is oftentimes uses very abstract sorts of forms of language to try and bring something out. And oftentimes the focus of poetry is not to necessarily get just information across, but to get a thought or a feeling. In fact, most times in the Bible, poetry is composed to offer praise to something, typically God, sometimes to man, but it is praising something and is trying to invoke feelings and thoughts so that you might also join in with that praise. What's interesting about Judges 4 and 5, it's one of the few places in the Bible where those two styles come together and they're seen side by side. And we're able to compare them and see the differences of them. And why that might be significant to us, say, well, why would I care to be able to do that? Well, a very common thing said today is the Bible is written in a very figurative form. Genesis 1 through 11 is Hebrew poetry and therefore should not be taken literal. We have a great example in Judges 4 and 5 of the difference between someone trying to say, let me tell you what happened, when it happened, how it happened, and let me tell you a poem that celebrates it. And we can see the differences of those. And then we can go and look at places that are oftentimes conflicted with the thoughts of man and be able to say, I can tell what Hebrew poetry is based off the examples that we have of it. And I can tell what it isn't as well. So having said that, we're going to jump into Judges chapter 4, and we're going to just begin by reading in the first few verses. And as we look at this, as we look through the account, I want us to try in the back of our minds to be recognizing things that we see, characters that we see in this account that are bringing a message to us of what faith looks like and the power that it has in the light of a time where things don't look very faithful. So look with me in verses 1 through 5. We'll begin there. When the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord, after Ehud died, the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor, and the commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. The sons of Israel cried to the Lord, for he had 900 iron chariots, and he oppressed the sons of Israel severely for 20 years. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the sons of Israel came up to her for judgment. A lot of information gets dumped on us at the very beginning of this passage. We get a whole lot, and right from the get-go, there is so much information there that we could really bog ourselves down in a very long and drawn-out study of the places and the peoples and some very interesting things. I don't want us to get bogged down in that, but I do want us to see some things that connect to our context of what's happening here. Number one is Israel hasn't changed. Israel hasn't repented. And that is the picture in the Judges that we are becoming familiar with. One that maybe is foreign to us as we've grown up kind of thinking of this cycle of Judges where there was sin and then an oppressor and then we repent and then God sends a deliverer. But the idea of repentance in the book of Judges is few and far between. There's a picture at the beginning, there's a picture at the end. But in the midst of all of that are people who, as we see here, cry out to the Lord. But they cry out for a specific reason in this passage. It points out oftentimes that this cry to the Lord is connected to their circumstances, is connected to things that aren't going very well in their world. What's not going well with them? Well, one, they have this great oppressor that's causing problems, Jabin, king of Hazor, and his commander, Sisera. And in these two people, you could do a whole bunch of research and get some really fascinating info. But we need to recognize something specific about Jabin and about Hazor. They create a problem for us in the book of Judges. Jabin is a name that has already been defeated. Now, likely Jabin is a dynastic name. It is akin to Pharaoh. It is a name, or Caesar. It is a name that is attached to the ruler, the king of that Canaanite city of Hazor. And so that's easy enough to explain. Why have we defeated Jabin already? And here he is again posing problems. Well, it's likely not the same king. It is someone carrying that same mantle, though. But the real problem lies in Hazor. Because Joshua 11 reveals that the city of Hazor entered into an alliance with other cities when Israel came into the land, and they're going to go out and they're going to march in a battle and defeat the Israelites, and things don't go as planned. And a lot of the cities are spared, but Hazor specifically in verse 13 is mentioned as being burned to the ground. We take care of Hazor. It is gone. And yet now, by a nation that has been utterly defeated and its city burned to the ground, we have a picture in Joshua 4 of them having possibly rebuilt, having someone who has taken up the mantle of the king of that city, and to an extent where they are able to very likely hire Sisera. Hazor is a Canaanite city. Sisera is possibly Hittite. So it's likely that they have hired this man as a mercenary to come because he has something that will help us. He has 900 iron chariots. And so there's a picture here of a defeated enemy that has now come back to pose a problem for us. And I think in that alone is a lesson that we must be very wary of. I've overcome this sin in the past, and it's not a problem for me anymore. I don't have to deal with an addiction that I once had in the past. I used to have a hard time with my language or with lying, but I've overcome that and I don't deal with that anymore. The enemies that we have defeated always stand a chance to rebuild and come back and attack us again. We must be aware that Satan is a prowling lion. And just because there's been a period of peace because we have overcome him through the grace of God doesn't mean that he is just given up entirely. And we see a picture of that maybe in the kingdom of Hazor, Jabin and Sisera appearing on the scene here after having seemingly come from a nation that's been defeated. It is this power And it is this technology that leads Israel to cry out. Israel is pointed out from the very beginning as having done evil in the sight of the Lord. And we saw in our class that David did evil in the sight of the Lord, and it troubled his heart, and he cried out to God, this wasn't the right thing for me to do. That is not the picture of Israel here. Israel is doing evil, and things are not going good, and they say, hey, this guy that we don't know what we're going to do with him. He's got 900 iron chariots. There's no hope for us. That's why we're crying out, because of our circumstances and because of our misery. And it is always interesting to me in the book of Judges that even when people are crying out, not because of their sin, not because of the things that they have done wrong, God's ear is attentive. God's ear is listening. And He is ready to give His mercy, and He is ready to give grace. And we see the beginning of that through this figure, Deborah. Now, Deborah is an interesting figure. She is not the judge of this account. You probably grew up singing the Judges song, and we get right here to after Shamgar, we have Deborah. But Deborah is not the judge of this account. But I think it is quite fitting that the honor goes to her in our songs even today, remembering her in this way. She's described in three ways. The first is described as a prophetess. And the fact that nothing designates her as a prophetess for the Lord might seem a little bit strange, that she's just mentioned as a prophetess without having any sort of ties to Yahweh. And it may even be intentional in the book of Judges, as much of the book of Judges is written in a way that causes us to step back and go, what exactly is going on with the people of God during this period of time? But it is not unlike other passages in Scripture, such as when Miriam is described as a prophetess, or as Huldah is described as a prophetess. Neither one of these being specifically linked to the Lord and yet speaking as mouthpieces of God to His people. That's the way that Deborah functions in this account. She is described as the wife of Lapidoth. His name is good for you to know only if you ever intend to win a Bible Jeopardy, a game where his name is going to come up, because this is the only time we see his name in Scripture. It never comes up again. It's just put here at a moment to kind of designate who it is that we're talking about. But because of that fact, because it seems so inconsequential, it seems such a strange addition to a woman that seemingly is going to function without any need of a husband, many have said, well, possibly that was an error in translation. Because after all, Lapidoth actually is it could be translated as torch. That's what his name means, torch. And so you will find those that are advocating today that what should be translated here is Deborah, the prophetess, a fiery woman. And while fitting with her character, I think the translation is unwarranted. Certainly she does serve as a great light in this period of the Judges. But she is designated here very clearly as being a prophetess and as being a wife and as being a judge. And you say, well, I thought Deborah wasn't the judge of this account. Well, the way that she is described here is different than many of the other judges that we see in the book of Judges, save for Samuel. She functions similarly to the way Samuel will function later, as a form of counsel, as a form of a person that offers the idea of maybe a litigation. But there's something maybe going on more than just that. Did you notice where she's at? It's pointed out that the sons of Israel, which, by the way, when you see that typically is referring to the nation. It's referring to the group of Israel, sometimes as a whole. We'll see other examples of that. The sons of Israel came up to Deborah in between the Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. The fact that they were coming up to her, I don't think is just specific to the idea that they're in the hill country and so they had to go up the hill to get to her. For the same language is used later on in the book of Judges. In Judges chapter 20 and in passages such as verses 18 through 26, you'll see that very same language, that the sons of Israel went up. They went up to the Lord to inquire of Him. The sons of Israel went up to weep before the Lord. The sons of Israel went up to offer a sacrifice to the Lord, a burnt offering to the Lord. This language is very similar to what's being described here, and it presents a sad moment in the history of Israel. And I don't think it's because Deborah has become a form of idol to them. I don't think that's the case. But consider where they're at. She stationed herself right outside of Bethel. Bethel is the house of God. It's the literal translation of that name, the house of God. It's the place where God came and spoke to Jacob. It is a significant place of worship in the Old Testament, and it's only 10 miles away from Shiloh. It's a day's journey, if that, from the place where the priests are, or the place where the children of Israel could go to inquire from the Urim and the Thummim, which was God's instructed and provided method of receiving His judgment. And that tells us that either the people had less trust and faith in the things that God had provided and more trust and faith in Deborah, or that the people in Shiloh, the priesthood in Shiloh, was not serving as they should have and not doing the things that they should have done. It had led to a situation where children of Israel were coming to Deborah and saying, Deborah, you give us an answer. And in fact, it's likely the questions that they were asking may have been litigation, may have been settle a situation for us. But given that the last thing that we saw the sons of Israel doing was crying out because Jabin and Sisera and the 900 iron chariots, it's likely they were going to Deborah and saying, Deborah, what do we do about this? Can you get us out of this situation? Can you tell us how God is going to provide some form of relief from all of this, because we are tired of living in oppression from under this man? As we keep reading, I think we'll start to get a picture that maybe that latter view is what's going on here. And the reason for the breakdown in trust, I think, becomes a little bit more apparent. So let's continue reading verses 6 through 10. Now, Deborah sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, Behold, the Lord, the God of Israel, has commanded, Go and march to Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men from the sons of Naphtali and from the sons of Zebulun. I will draw out to you Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his many troops to the river Kishon, and I will give him into your hand. Then Barak said to her, If you will go with me, then I will go, but if you will not go with me, I will not go. She said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the honor shall not be yours on the journey that you are about to take, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hands of a woman. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali together to Kadesh, and 10,000 men went up with him. Deborah also went up with him. You know, we know very little about Barak in the grand scheme of things. We know a little bit more about him than Lapidoth, but we don't know a whole lot about Barak. We get a little bit of his lineage. We get a little bit about where he comes from. But I'll tell you the most significant thing that we know about Barak. We get this glimmer of information that is of most value when it comes to understanding who Barak is. We learn that Barak is chosen by God. And of all the things that you could say about Barak, you could go in and say, well, we're going to talk about his experience in war, and we're going to talk about the things that he has done to prove himself mighty. All the information that we could have been given, we are given the one information that tells us this is the man qualified for the job because God chose him. God said, Barak, I'm going to deliver Israel through your hands. And Barak says, no. In that, he's very similar to Moses. When God says, Moses, I'm going to deliver Israel from your hands, and Moses him-hauls around the bush like, oh, you know, God, I don't know if I'm the right guy for this. Have you heard me speak? I'm not a very good speaker. I don't know that they're going to even listen to me. Barak is much more to the point. He just says, absolutely not. Not unless, Deborah, you go with me. And maybe this presents one of the central problems that Judges 4 is revealing. This is what's going on in Israel. This is the reason why maybe we don't have the trust in the priesthood. This is the reason why maybe we don't have the people coming and learning from God and receiving His judgments and His counsel? Could it be because all that God has chosen up to this point to serve and to function in His ways and to provide and lead for His people, all the men that God has chosen to do this are either refusing or demonstrating their failure to serve in the way that God has called them out to do, to walk in the path that He has set for them. As I said earlier, Deborah is not the judge in this account. She's not the answer. There's a problem that's going on. There's a request to God. God, what's going to happen? How are you going to get us out of this situation? All of the stress that's in our lives because of our sin, all of the stress because Jabin and Sisera are oppressing us. How are you going to get us out? Deborah is not the answer to the problem, but she communicates the problem to us clearly, and she communicates God's response to it. I'm going to do something about it. And as we recognize that, and we think about how Deborah is drawing attention now to the situation, I think it's going to help us to see even greater God's intention through all of this. That it isn't going to be any human construct. It isn't going to be any human character that is going to ultimately get them out of this situation. God is going to be the one that leads them out. And that becomes increasingly more clear as we listen to what happens in verses 11 through 16. I will say before we read this, did you reflect on what God said through Deborah to Sisera? Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go here. I'm going to send them there. There's going to be this battle. I'm going to give them into your hands. This is so clearly God talking like, I am the puppet master, and these are my puppets. I am pulling all the strings. I'm going to make everything happen in this way. He is designating to them, I am in complete control here. And if we didn't see that in those passages, we're going to see it even more in the following section. Read with me 11 through 16. Now Heber the Kenite had separated himself from the Kenites from the sons of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, and had pitched his tent as far away as the oak in Zaanannim, which is near Kadesh. Then they told Sisera that Barak, the son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor. Sisera called together all of his chariots, 900 iron chariots, and all the people who were with him from Harosheth Hagoyim to the river Kishon. Deborah said to Barak, Arise, for this is the day of the Lord, in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Behold, the Lord has gone out before you. So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. The Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army with the edge of the sword before Barak. And Sisera alighted from his chariot and fled away on foot. But Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not even one was left. So it begins this really strange way in this section. 11 through 16 begins with kind of this surprise character. We've been talking about Deborah. We've been talking about Barak. We're talking about the enemies of Israel. And then out of nowhere we have, and there's this guy Heber. Heber's here as well. He lives in this land. Let me tell you just very quickly about Heber. He's a Kenite. The Kenites, you go back to Judges 1 and other passages prior to that, we've seen the Kenites are kind of in this alliance with Israel. They are serving to work along with Israel to help take the land. They've got their own land. But this guy, he separates himself from all of that. And as we'll see later, not only is that a little bit strange that he's kind of separated himself from these people that are in a relationship with Israel, but we'll see later he's entered into a relationship with their enemy, with Jabin. And so we just kind of get him mentioned, and knowing the end of the story, we recognize why. But it's something that's said very quickly, and then we just move right into what's going on. It's possible that verse 12, Sisera prepares to meet Israel. It's possible that Heber's the one that tells him, hey, Sisera, Barak is getting ready to attack. He's gathering troops. You're going to need to do something about this. And so they go and they meet him on the battlefield near the river Kishon. Now, I want you to key back in on verses 14 and 15. Had Deborah said, "Arise and fight and go defeat your enemy, Barak. Go prove yourself the man that God thought that you were," this account would sound quite different. That is not what she says, though. Her language is such that it almost sounds as if she says, "Barak, pay attention. Are you watching? Arise, because this is the day that God is going to show you what He can do. Arise, because the Lord has gone out before you. Arise, because the Lord has provided victory over Sisera." And even as we continue reading the account, it's almost as if Barak and his army are bystanders. The Lord goes, the Lord routes before Sisera or before Barak. All of this sounds as if Barak stands up and gets to see what God does. And this is a passage or a portion of the story where something like chapter 5 really does help to fill in more of the picture. Because in chapter 5, we're told a little bit about how God does that. As I mentioned, chapter 5 is poetic. And so chapter 5 is going to use poetry language to draw our minds to what the Lord has done. When they worship God, they sing this song of praise for the victory that God provides. In chapter 5, verse 4, they say the earth quaked and the heavens dripped. This idea of natural calamities that were happening. The rain was falling. And it also goes on to say in verse 21, the Kishon swept them away. The Kishon is the river where they met for battle. And why bring all this up? Because Sisera has 900 iron chariots, which are far superior to even 10,000 foot soldiers. This is going to be no contest if we're just talking about 900 iron chariots versus 10,000 human soldiers. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about 900 iron chariots versus Yahweh. And Yahweh says, I control the playing field. I control the battle. I control everything about this. And everything in my creation works for me to provide my will that it be done. And that's what we see occurring here in chapter 5. God brings the victory. And over again, we're going to see this. And I pointed it out before, and I'm going to point it out still. In the Bible, war is not won by superior technology. And war is not won by superior might. And we need to get that through our minds today. We need to continue to see that the battle is not won because we have bigger numbers. One person with God makes the majority, makes the difference. You amongst your friends, you and your classmates, you in your place of employment, you can be victorious in the battle even though you are outnumbered by those who stand opposed to God. Because the battle is not won by numbers. The battle is not won by technology. I think in an increasingly political environment in our day, we have the mindset that the battle is going to be won by who is in the White House. Let me stress to you again, the battle is not won by technology or might. It's not won by policy. It is won by Christ. It is won by God with His people doing His will as His creation does in chapter 5, submitting themselves to Him and showing that power mightily to the world. So let's continue reading verses 17 through 24 and wrap up the rest of chapter 4. It says, Now Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin, the king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, Turn aside, my master, turn aside to me, do not be afraid. And he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. And he said to her, Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. So she opened a bottle of milk and gave him a drink. Then she covered him. He said to her, Stand in the doorway of the tent, and it shall be, if anyone comes and inquires of you and says, Is there anyone here, that you shall say, No. But Jael, the Heber's wife, took a tent peg, and seized a hammer in her hand and went secretly to him and drove the peg into his temple. And it went through into the ground, for he was sound asleep and exhausted, so he died. And behold, as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him and said to him, "Come, and I will show you the man whom you're seeking." And he entered with her, and behold, Sisera was lying dead with a tent peg in his temple. So God subdued on that day Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the sons of Israel. The hand of the sons of Israel pressed heavier and heavier upon Jabin, the king of Canaan, until they had destroyed Jabin, the king of Canaan. As Sisera escapes into the tent of Heber, for a moment in this story, it sounds like the dream scenario. I'm on foot. I've lost all my chariots. I've lost all all the benefit that I had. But I come across Heber and I recognize a friend. I recognize someone. This is someone who has a covenant, a peace agreement with my king. Here is an ally. Here is a place where I can maybe find some refuge. And it would be a dream scenario if it wasn't for the absolute nightmare that we're going to read in the character of Jael. Now, Jael's name means mountain goat. And I only bring that up to say, this is a woman that went by the name Mountain Goat. That's who we're dealing with here. Mountain Goat, come into my tent. And she is going to live up to that gruff and rugged and crafty and powerful name that she has been given. And notice how she is in control the entire time. She sees him and she beckons him over to her tent to come in. And she places a heavy rug upon him. And she's doing all the talking. In fact, the only time that he talks, the two times that he talks in this account, is one, he sort of says, "Hey, give me some water." And she gives him milk, likely to further seduce him into what she has already planned. And two, if anyone asks, tell them nobody is here. Truer words, I don't imagine he recognized the truth to that statement. No one, no man was about to be there in just a few moments. She is in complete control in all of this. And she creeps to his bed beside him and she executes him. And what's interesting as we continue reading on in the account, she seems to also be in control when Barak shows up. Barak is searching for Sisera, judging by her words. And that's odd because God, through Deborah, has told Barak, you're not going to be the one to kill him. You're not going to get the honor. And it's almost as if Barak is saying, but maybe I can. Maybe if I find him before anybody else does. And it's interesting that what Jael says to him is, the guy you're looking for, I know where he's at. Come in here, I'll show you to him. And you have to wonder if in Barak's mind, if he thought, maybe this is my chance. I'm going to find Sisera hiding in the corner. Maybe he's under a pile of clothes. Maybe he's under a basket. But he's went in and he's tried to overthrow this little woman here. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to be the rescuer. I'm going to be the hero of the day. I certainly imagine he did not expect to go in and find Sisera stapled to the bottom of the tent. But this is the way the story ends. Exactly how God said it would. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to give them into your hands. You're not going to get the honor. And all of the things that God said coming to pass exactly how he said. And then chapter 5 sings a song of praise. And one of the things that it details is the horridness of both what Jael had saved the women of Israel from, but also the very strange occurrence as a kind of a refrain at the end of the song that Israel was saying to rejoice. If you look at the very end of chapter 5, it is very much like Exodus 15, praising God for the victory and the people that he used to bring the victory. And what we recognize is that in chapter 5, verse 30, they mention this line: a maiden, 2 maidens for every warrior. And it tells us just a little bit about how awful things maybe had gotten in Israel. That the soldiers of Sisera were counting as spoil. This is something that we've taken as spoil. The children, the daughters specifically of Israel, that they belong to us. Jael's actions here are not portrayed as evil or wrong, but in a sense, deliverance for the daughters of Israel, to be spared the things that the armies would have desired to do. But notice that the children of Israel, when they make attention to this, sing a song of praise, not for the deliverance of the daughters of Israel, but for the lament of the mother of Sisera. Singing a song of praise for her as she sits poised, watching for her son to come home from battle, and he never comes. Poised to sit and weep as she recognizes what that means. And again, Judges chapter 5 ends, and it leaves us with a pause. What exactly is going on? What is the spiritual nature of Israel at this moment? We have these pictures that seem like things are very bad, and then we'll have a picture that seems like things are good, and then towards the close of the event, we're still left going, what are they thinking? What exactly are they doing? And I think that is what the book of Judges is attempting to do. I think that is why the narrator, who very likely writes this in a period of the kings, likely shortly, sometime after the death of Solomon, they're probably writing this. We would have to wonder if they're not writing this to cause current Israel to look at the things that went on in the past and ask themselves, where did that lead us? And for us to look at it today and ask ourselves, where did that lead them? And as we will see, what is mentioned very briefly and very obscurely in verse 5, in a sense of violence towards women, will become much more vivid and much more accepted within the nation of Israel, not within their enemies, but within the people of God by the end of the book. All of this is causing us to see where we are and to look at them and say, we see where sin leads. So what are the pictures of faith, and how do we draw a lesson from that for ourselves today? There is no doubt about it that the key picture of faith in Judges chapter 4, that what it is seeking to highlight the most are women. Women who did what the men of Israel refused to do or failed to do. And I hope that today, every godly woman sees the impact and the power of their faith. When those around you, and specifically when those who have been placed by God in a role to lead, in a role to serve in a way that is specific to men, when you see them failing at that, when you see them not living up to what God has called them to do, I hope that when men are weak and are unspiritual and are lacking in their responsibilities, I hope that the Christian women see the example of Deborah and see the character of Jael. I say that with caution. I hope that you see the impact that your faith has and that you live up, you step up to the power that faith provides you in those moments. Think about what Deborah did when she went to Barak. She didn't go to Barak and say, Barak, it is time for you to man up. You are being such a wimp, and you need to go do something. She said, Barak, God has called you. She put truth in front of him, and she encouraged him. And even when Barak says, I'm not going to do it unless you go with me, which is not the answer we hope for. We hope for Barak to say, Yes, Deborah, you are right. God has called me, and I am going to lead in faith. But even when he did not give the answer that she hoped, she said, if that's what you need to do what God has commanded, that's what I'm going to do. If this is what it takes for you to follow what God has called for you to be, then that's what I'm going to do. Deborah is a picture of strength and faith, and also a picture of meekness and a picture of encouragement and love. Jael, even though she has a husband who is not just going, all right, I'm having a hard time making the right decision, I'm maybe fearful, he is at peace with the enemy. He has said, I'm going to leave the people of God, and I'm going to stand with the enemies of God's people. She says, I will do what is right, and I will help deliver the people of Israel from the oppression of God's enemies. Women, what that means is submission to your husband does not involve sacrificing submission and surrender to the Lord. If a husband will not do what is right in the eyes of the Lord, if he refuses to follow with all of his heart, if he will not lead his family in his ways, Jael is a picture of someone who says, I will serve the Lord and I will do what is right. Both of them, Deborah and Jael, serve as pictures of faithful women, faithful to Yahweh. I pray that the sisters here will always have the desire and the strength to choose to do the same. Encourage your husbands. Encourage the men of this congregation. We need leaders, and God has called you and chosen you. Pray for them. Accompany them. Press them on in that path. And brothers, this is a call for us too. Judges chapter 4 is a call for men to stand up and to serve. Husbands need to take spiritual leadership within our families, and we need to take it very, very seriously. There was a recent report done in a Barna research study. The name of the study is called You Lost Me. And what it did was looked at children who had grown up in a church setting and yet had now abandoned the faith. And some of those were a disconnection from church life for an extended period of time. Some of those were a permanent disconnection from a church relationship. And what they found was 59% of those who at 15 years old had stepped away from the church chose to do that because of some very striking reasons. And before I get to those, I'm going to ask, we're saying be strong and courageous, so I'm going to ask for these 5 men right here, Micah and Jackson and Hunter and Ryder, to stand up and face our congregation. "59%. You 3 on the front can sit down. It's 3 out of 5 fell away. Why? Brothers, you all can sit down as well. Some of the reasons they gave was because of shallow experiences that they had encountered with Christianity. They said, we were raised to see that Christianity was not more important than work and than jobs. Christianity was not more important than school and than education. Christianity was not more important than sports or hobbies. And while that is a systemic problem, men, you are chosen and you have been called by God to stand up and lead your families. Show them what deep, involved, committed pictures of faith look like. But there is one really important point that's not on this board. What is a picture of faith? And it comes at the answer of who was it that gave them the victory that day. It wasn't Deborah. It wasn't Jael. It certainly wasn't Barak. It was God. And we need to see that. We need to recognize that point, that it's God that provided them the victory, and it's God that still provides the victory today. Open your Bibles back up to Hebrews 11 for a moment, where we began in our scripture reading, and look at the names that we see recorded here in verse 32. Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah. We've looked at one of these so far. We're going to look at the rest of them, and very clearly we're going to see they don't fit in with David and Samuel and Moses and Adam or Abel. We don't see them fitting in with Abraham. They do not fit in with the rest of the characters in this passage. And yet, God says these who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouth of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. I always wonder if that foreign armies to flight is talking about Barak. Barak doesn't belong in that picture. We would look at his story and say he doesn't belong there. All day long, we would raise our hands and say, I agree, he doesn't belong there. And each and every one of us would be absolutely wrong, because God says he does. God said he is a picture of faith. That's the graciousness of our Lord. That's the graciousness of your God. That even though Barak, he didn't just hesitate. He outright refused. But with the encouragement of Deborah, when he took the command of God and decided, I'm going to obey that, God said, that's a picture of faith. That's a hero faith. I'm going to record him, and I'm going to let everyone know that is someone that I see as faithful. And so maybe this morning, you're here, you're sitting here today, and you're saying, you know what? I haven't led my family in the way that I should in the past. I've been hesitating to do that. I've been refusing to do that. Maybe you're here today and you're saying, I have not been a picture like Deborah. I have not been a picture of faith. I have not been encouraging. I've not been thinking about spiritual things. I've been letting worldly things fill my mind. Whether you're here today as a male or you're here today as a female, I wonder if you're here today and you're going, I feel a lot like Barak in this moment. I've not been the spiritual leader that my church needs, that my family needs, that my community needs. Then this is the lesson that I want you to learn from this story. You can be remembered by God as a faithful servant, not because of your past, because of the decision that you make right now. I'm going to step up, and I'm going to serve my God. I'm going to become a picture of faith today. Even though I may have been weak, even though I may have been hesitant, even though I may have refused in the past, God's grace means that I can change that description of me right now by just simply choosing, God, I'm going to listen to you. Like Barak, each and every one of us here this morning has been chosen. You ask yourself, am I really the guy? Am I really the girl? Am I really the person that can make a difference, that can be a light, that can impact others? Everything that I or anybody else needs to know you is wrapped up in John 3:16. God so loved you, a part of his world, a part of his creation. God had chosen you. God had designated you as worthy of that love. And a love so deep and so rich that he gave his only son so that through belief in him you may not perish but have eternal life. If you are here this morning and you recognize that I have, like Barak, I have heard that God is calling me, that he's chosen me, and I am resisting that. And I'm hesitating to follow that. I want you to know that like Deborah, we will walk with you every step of the way. We will go with you as far as we can. But even more than that, Jesus promises to walk with you. and lead you as his brother, as his sister, to lead you to where the Father is today. Or if you are here today and you have made that decision, but you have recognized that you've really started to turn back to the world and you're hesitant to walk in the paths of righteousness again today, as we sing this next song, revive us. Lord, I'm coming home. I want you to think about these words. I want you to think about the promise of faith that God provides to us, that I am faithful to give the victory. I am faithful to bring you home. Brethren, arise. This is the day that the Lord has brought the victory for us. If we can assist you in singing that, come forward as we sing the song of encouragement.